What's up guys, Kevin here from Relax Learn Guitar. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can take your strumming to the next level. I'm going to do that by showing you 7 mistakes that I see beginners make a lot when they're starting out and how to fix those. Things that are going to include like the right strings to strum, how to use your wrist the best way, how to make sure your timing is down, and several other things. So let's jump in. In my Relax Learn Guitar membership, I help beginners over 40 become the guitar players they've always wanted to be. And a lot of the things I'm showing you today are things that I cover inside the membership to help folks get on the right track. So the first mistake I'm going to talk about is, and this shouldn't be more of a term of a mistake, the issue that I see the most is that beginners really want to strum all those strings, man, all the time. And there's nothing like wrong with that. That's why it's not really a mistake. But to move past that, the guitar, you do not need to strum all 6 strings on every single chord that you're playing. And in fact, the chords are kind of built around roots. That's for another time. And you can really make a big difference. And I'll just kind of show you what I mean. So strumming all the strings at once. We're just doing a really simple 8th notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a great way to practice changing your chords, but look at this difference. A very simple thing to change. What I'm doing here is I'm strumming down on the bass notes of the chord. So like the thicker strings on your guitar, that's kind of like your bass area, strings 6, 5, and 4. Then I'm strumming up on the high or the treble strings, strings 1, 2, and 3, the thin ones. So I'm still doing the same pattern, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but I'm not strumming all the strings on every chord. And this is kind of like step 1. It's going to make a big difference, and as you move through and progress on playing the guitar, it's going to become something that's really fun to discover because there's so many different ways to strum and make strum patterns interesting. Which takes me to number 2, and that is beginners, people starting out, typically will play a song and use the same strum pattern through the whole song. Maybe that down up one. If you change up the strum pattern, you keep things interesting, and folks listening to you are probably going to get bored much less quickly, and it's just going to sound more interesting. They'll be wondering what's going to happen next. If you like this lesson so far, be sure and click that like button. I would really appreciate it. So that can be as simple as changing things up between like the verse and the chorus. So maybe during the verse, you're doing that down up, not playing all the strings. And maybe it's for the chorus, it might be and then back to that. See how that's more interesting to your ear, and it's also our brains look for patterns and try to predict what's going to be happening in music. So doing this keeps people on the edge and keeps them interested and attending to what you're doing. Number 3 is I really see folks when they're starting out is they just dig into those strings with that strumming hand. It's going to also impact kind of the dynamics, which we're going to talk about later on here in the lesson. When you're kind of first starting out, you might be doing kind of this, just vertically into the guitar. And what you really want to do is paint the fence. I tell my members this all the time. You want to do some really relaxed movements with your wrist. It's not this, it's not digging in like this. It's really more of a rotation. So I kind of talk about, painting a fence, and your wrist is doing this kind of motion. So when you're strumming down, you're really kind of strumming with your pick more at like a 45-degree angle. And when you strum up, it rotates and comes back up. And it makes a big difference because you don't always have to play loud. And doing this wrist motion really helps with your control. Speaking of control, number 4 is the way that you're holding the pick. I see a lot of folks start out by pinching that pick between their thumb and their index finger. And like, I don't even want to play my guitar like that because I know I can feel that pick's going to fly out on my hand. It's going to get lost in my sound hole forever. It's going to fall on the floor and my dog will eat it. So that's not a great way to hold a pick because you don't have as much control. So what you want to do is I tell folks it's like clicking a remote control. So you have your pick resting here on your index finger, kind of like this. And then you pop your thumb down on there. The further up you move your finger and thumb toward the pointy part of the pick, the more control you're actually going to have. And then the other thing to remember is you don't got to kill it. I tell folks, it's not like, or think of this like kind of like a bird. You want to hold on to your pick. You don't want it to fly away, but you don't want to strangle it and kill it. So you want to have a little bit of give in there. And this will become really evident when you start paying attention to that wrist motion. So my knuckles aren't turning white from like holding this guitar pick. But my wrist is rotating. And I've got more control of my pick, and I feel more confident when I strum that way. Number 5 brings us to our friend the metronome. And I'm going to, if you've watched any of my videos or if you're in the Relax on Guitar membership, you know that I really kind of preach this. I use just an old clunky battery operated piece of plastic. I don't get real fancy with it. You can change time signatures. You can go through and stress different beeps. I really just like it for beats per minute. You'll see that as BPM. And one of the things that will really help take your strumming to the next level is using a metronome on a regular basis. Now, folks who are kind of like at the pro level probably don't do this anymore because they've used it so much they've kind of trained themselves. So it's really just some simple getting used to kind of strumming. You don't have to even fret a chord. Just like mute your strings and strum down. This is on 80 beats per minute. Down on those quarter notes, you can add in eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and kind of like at the beginning of this lesson. There's a lot you can do with a metronome. I'm going to leave a link up here for you to check out a lesson that goes in much more detail with that metronome. So check that out when you're done with this lesson. And I'm telling you, metronomes and using those will go a long, long way in helping you get to that next level of strumming. Okay, number 6 is dynamics and how loud people are playing. I kind of mentioned this when I was talking about that wrist, because that wrist does a lot to, it has a big outcome in the way your sound is going to be. And starting with that wrist is really a good place to start. But what that leads to is you want to have some differences in the way that you're playing. And when I say dynamics, it's loud and soft. It's not so much like the way you're playing it, it's the way that you're playing it to keep it interesting and mix things up. And just changing the dynamic and the loud and softness of how you're playing really can make a big difference. If you're out at a karaoke, well, karaoke would be a good example. You're out at a club and it's open mic night and folks are playing the guitar. I bet you can tell who's been playing longer than the next guy or gal just from this alone, because when you hear the same strum pattern played at the same level and usually loud, that's a key indicator of a beginner guitar player. But if you hear something like this, maybe a softer verse, and then when it gets to something they want to kind of emphasize, that little change there makes a big difference when you're strumming and taking from kind of beginner and moving more toward that intermediate phase. There is I've got a very detailed lesson inside our membership on dynamics. If you'd like more information about how to become a member, you can check out the link in the description below. Okay, this last one can be a big game changer, and it's kind of related to the dynamics because it's changing the way your guitar is going to sound while you're strumming it. The first one is palm muting. So the difference between this and this, it's really evident like on those like bass drums. We talked about playing like, you know, bass going down on the strum on the bass notes and up on those high string treble notes. If you do some palm muting on those lower strings, it makes a big difference, especially if you're doing more like maybe power chords. The technique is one that is simple to explain, but it is one you have to put a little bit of work into to see what works for you best. I'm using the fat part of my hand here, palm, and I'm resting it right here on the strings, which makes them muted. But you got to kind of play around with your guitar because everyone's different, and you want to find that sweet spot. So sometimes when you're palm muting, if your palm is too farther up on the strings, like going toward your neck, you're going to get this. And it's not a good thing. I mean, unless that's what you're going for. But if you move it back toward your bridge, you're gonna find that sweet spot where it's muted, but you still get the notes ringing through. So look at this difference. Just strumming down up, then strumming down up on the low and high, or strum down on the low, up on the high. And now palm muting. So those are the 7 things I see beginners do the most that impacts their strumming and makes them sound more like a beginner and less like a more intermediate or kind of more interesting guitarist, if you will. So add those tips in there to make those changes and start using some of these, and you'll notice a big difference right away. If you'd like to notice an even bigger difference in how you're playing, you want to check out this playlist. It's my starter series. Great. I think there's 7 lessons in there. Very straightforward from beginning to end to kind of get you going. Even if you've been playing a little while, you might want to check out that starter series because it can really help you get further along. And remember, you're never too old to learn, and I'll see you guys for the next lesson.